Have you ever been charmed by a retro item at a junk sale? Perhaps you were drawn to a pretty timepiece, vase, or item of clothing. Despite its worn appearance and patina flaws, you fell in love with and purchased the item. But maybe when you got home, strange things started to happen. The clock's mechanism is sporadic. It sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. It ticks on and off, often waking you at a particular time in the night with its loud ticking sound. Or when you wear that special vintage ball gown to a fancy dress party, you seem to feel overcome with a strange feeling of dread that is difficult to shift and clouds your party mood all evening. Perhaps, every time you place flowers in a particular vase, they wither and die more quickly than usual. In some cultures around the world, it's frowned upon to buy second-hand clothes. This is because the aura, or spirit of the person who wore them before, is thought to stick to the clothes and can bring bad luck. Can the same be true of other inanimate objects? And can furniture be haunted? In the Meltham Shoe Shop in Cornwall in 2005, as reported on the Paranormal Database, 2 shop workers were terrorized by several poltergeist-like incidents revolving around a pair of deck shoes. The footwear would jump off the display stand in front of workers and move around at night. A priest who was called in to bless the shop failed to prevent the shoes from moving again. Another story related to Mrs. Daffodil on her blog Mrs. Daffodil Digresses concerns the tale of an elderly lady who was killed while on holiday by accidentally falling into a ravine. Her ghost later returned to haunt the local vicar, apparently because she was searching for one of her shoes, which had got lost and wedged between cracks in the rocks during the incidents of her fall. Once the shoe had been found and returned to her, the ghost never appeared again. And there is the story of a family in the United States who experienced unusual activity at their home, where inexplicably clothes would be found strewn around the house, having been tidied away the night before. These incidents were particularly puzzling because the house had been built recently, with no history of previous occupants, and no one having settled in the area before. The phenomenon was investigated, and it was found that many years ago some early settlers who had been travelling through the area had tragically lost their child. As they were poor and clothes were scarce, they were forced to bury the child naked. It transpired that the little girl, manifesting as a ghost, had been visiting the house and hunting for clothes to keep warm. After searching the area, her grave was discovered, and the family buried a blanket nearby for her. After this, the strangest incident never occurred again, presumably because the child was now able to keep herself warm. The phenomenon of spirits inhabiting clothes is quite a fascinating and surprisingly frequent occurrence. Adults often recall having had conversations with beings or entities as children, who sometimes inhabited the wardrobe and took on a kind of human form by wearing the clothes found therein. One adult described the entity as having been sent to protect her and her sibling, and having a voice that sounded like dry leaves. It would regularly appear and speak to them, something neither child found frightening, until many years later when they shared their memories of childhood, and were surprised to discover that they shared the memory of this particular occurrence. Another adult recalls the strange entity in the wardrobe, who was not alone and had several friends. They would all manifest in the child's clothes in order to take on human form, and the child would even get into trouble with their parents for making a mess in the closet, because the beings did not hang the clothes back up after using them. This child also developed a great fear of coat hangers as a result of their encounter, because of the notion that the hook of the coat hanger manifested as the head of the being. This often posed a problem for the parents of the child, especially when clothes shopping. A mother recalls one evening when her young daughter interrupted her, having settled down for sleep with no problem. She came to find her mum complaining that she had woken up and couldn't get back to sleep because her clothes were all dancing around the room. On entering the bedroom, the mum discovered that the clothes were lying all strewn around the room, as if in fact they had been dancing. There have been reported cases of haunted objects and furniture from all over the world. Haunted swings that move on their own when the air is completely still, not even a hint of a breeze. This strange phenomenon has often been captured on video. Most recently in India, The swing pushes back and forth vigorously, as if inhabited by an invisible child, with no plausible explanation. Haunted mirrors sold for £2,800 at auction in December 2018 to a Los Angeles museum, the 110-year-old silver-framed easel mirror that belonged to Edward John Smith, captain of the ill-fated HMS Titanic. The mirror was gifted to his maid, Ethelwyn, in lieu of her wages, after he went down with his ship on that fateful day, April 14, 1912. She swore that each year on the anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic, her master's face would appear in the mirror, gazing out longingly at the land of the living. Another haunted mirror story is retold by Madam Spooky on Findery.com. Myrtle's plantation, a ghost by the name of Chloe, still haunts the property. She was a slave wronged by her master. Most say she was forced to be his mistress, and sought revenge by baking a poisonous cake. But her plan backfired, and her master's wife and children died, but not him. She was consequently hung and thrown into the Mississippi River. The souls of the unfortunate mother and her daughters are said to have been trapped inside a large mirror at the plantation soon after death, because the traditional custom of covering the mirrors in the house when death occurred was not followed. Of course, the haunted rocking chair that moves vigorously back and forth when no one is sitting in it, or creaks and glides, almost imperceptibly slowly as someone walks past it, is a classic feature of many a horror film. But in a mansion in the Philadelphia mountains, you can find another kind of haunted chair, one that you might do well to avoid sitting in. Built in 1911 and named after a chateau in the Loire Valley of France, the Balleroy Mansion sits innocently nestled among the bright, crisp countryside of Chestnut Hills in Philadelphia, USA. It has been described as the most haunted house in Pennsylvania, and is allegedly infested with a myriad of ghosts, poltergeists, and other supernatural beings. Plagued by ectoplasm, and notorious for sightings of a small blonde-haired boy called Stephen, and an elderly lady walking with a cane, the house is so haunted that the numerous police reports compiled after attending when the alarm systems are triggered list the probable cause as ghosts. The electrical fields of the house attract lightning, and the electric lights will suddenly cease to function for no apparent reason on a regular basis. In the Blue Room at Balleroy, there is a 200-year-old chair known as the Chair of Death. This chair is said to be haunted by the ghost Amanda, who manifests as a red mist that rises up to kill people who sit in it. The chair is thought to be responsible for the deaths of at least 3 people, who died within 2 weeks of having sat in it. Another haunted chair can be found at Thirsk Museum in Yorkshire, England. The Busby's Stoop chair, originally housed at the Busby Stoop Public House, is also known as Dead Man's Chair. It has been placed high up on the ceiling at Thirsk to prevent people from sitting in it, because it is believed to have caused the death and fatal accidents of people who do so. In particular, during the Second World War, several Canadian airmen who sat in the chair did not return from bombing missions afterwards. The chair is said to have been the favourite of Thomas Busby, who cursed the chair when he was arrested while sitting in it for murdering his father-in-law. He was later hanged at the gallows adjacent to the pub. As described on the website aminoapps.com, in 1702, a convicted murderer named Thomas Busby was about to be hanged for his crimes. His last request was to have his final meal served at his favourite pub in Thirsk, England. He finished his meal, stood up, and said, "May sudden death come to anyone who dare sit in my chair." The chair remained in the pub for centuries, and patrons would often dare one another to sit in the cursed seat. During World War II, airmen from a nearby base frequented the pub, and locals noticed that the soldiers who sat in the chair would never return from war. In 1967, 2 Royal Air Force pilots sat in the chair, only to crash their truck into a tree just after they left. In 1970, a mason tested his fate in the hot seat, only to die that same afternoon by falling into a hole at his job site. A year after that, a roofer who sat in it died after the roof he was working on collapsed. When the pub's cleaning lady tripped and fell into the chair, she died shortly afterwards from a brain tumour. This list goes on, and finally the pub owner moved the chair into the basement. Unfortunately, even in storage, the chair claimed another victim. After a delivery man took a quick rest while unloading packages in the storeroom, he was killed in a car accident that same day. Eventually, the pub owner donated the chair to the local museum in 1972. The museum displays the chair by hanging it 5 feet in the air so that no one can possibly sit in it by mistake again. Fortunately, no one has sat in the chair since. Another story of a haunted chair is told by the house whisperer, Christian Kyriakou. Christian Kyriakou is an architect, house whisperer, philosopher, author, storyteller, spatial psychotherapist, musician, composer, filmmaker, feng shui, vastu, and geomancy consultant. His work with the spatial energy of buildings engages with how aspects of acoustics, vibration, music and harmonics relate to sacred geometry in architectural spaces. His psychotherapeutic approach involves reading and understanding the consciousness of buildings, which in turn affects the relationship of people to their homes and workplaces. When invited to investigate mysterious goings-on at a house in the United Kingdom, he was surprised to discover the spirit of a Russian man who was occupying an armchair in the living room. He had to learn to speak Russian in order to exorcise this ghost and help his spirit to pass on. This mysterious event is described in the chapter Ghosts in the Furniture in The House Whisperer. In another scenario, a lady bought 2 armchairs from a charity shop. The manager received a call complaining that she wished to return the chairs, demanding the shop come to collect them. Insisting on knowing why they should take them back, the purchaser replied, "There are a couple of old ladies sitting in the armchairs who won't go away, so I don't want them." Who knows what strange forces are at work in our consciousness and in our mysterious world? Have you ever had a strange feeling when handling a particular object? Or been put off from buying vintage clothing because of how it made you feel when you tried it on? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below.